A teenager smirked at a wounded veteran. Seconds later, Stallone stood up and shut down the entire gym. The gym buzzed with energy as students packed the bleachers, eyes shining with anticipation. The annual Veterans Day assembly was always a spectacle, but this year carried extra weight. He stepped onto the stage in uniform, crisp, polished, every ribbon telling a story, and silence rippled through the crowd. Among the spectators, Mason leaned forward, arms folded and lips curled in a half-smirk. He'd heard rumors about the guest speaker, a local veteran named Stallone, but he dismissed them as hometown hype. Take a second to subscribe. It really helps. Thanks. Now, back to the story. The principal's voice echoed through the microphone, introducing Stallone's decades of service, the missions overseas, the medals. Polite applause rose, polite enough until Mason's snide whisper cut through it. What's the big deal? He's just another soldier. Heads turned, a ripple of discomfort spreading among Mason's classmates. Stallone's gaze flicked across the audience, briefly pausing on the boy whose mockery echoed too clearly in the stillness. Mason felt a flicker of unease as the veteran straightened his posture and raised the mic. His voice carried calm authority, no bitterness, only quiet strength, as he began to share a mission that changed him forever. Tales of midnight patrols under desert skies, of brothers lost to ambushes, and of the scars, both visible and hidden, that came back home with him. Mason watched the uniformed figure, suddenly smaller under those words, realizing the weight behind each syllable. When a photo of young Stallone in foxhole gear appeared on the screen, every eye held his gaze, every memory of war etched onto his face. Mason's smirk faded. He pressed his palms into his thighs, suddenly aware of how out of place his cynicism sounded. The applause at the end was thunderous, genuine this time, and Mason found himself clapping too, slower, hand shudders of regret. In that moment, he understood for the first time that respect wasn't automatic. It was earned. As the crowd rose in a standing ovation, Mason's heart pounded with a curiosity he couldn't ignore. What did it take to bear real scars? And what would Stallone reveal next? He slipped out of the assembly early, footsteps echoing against the polished hallway floor. The chatter of students trailed behind him like static. In the quiet of the locker room, he leaned against a row of metal lockers, sliding his hand across a faint ridge on his forearm. It itched sometimes, a reminder of nights he'd rather forget, though nothing like Stallone's scars. He closed his eyes and let the memory surface. The flash of an improvised explosive device, the sudden blast ripping through sand and sweat, and the way it had thrown him forward into darkness. When he'd woken, the world felt muted, until pain reminded him he was alive. He traced the jagged line beneath his sleeve, hidden from view but always present, like a silent promise. He thought of Stallone's steady tone, the way his shoulders had stiffened before he spoke of losing his squad in that ambush. No film script could capture that moment, the weight of survival pressing down on a man who'd seen too much. The locker room lights flickered, and he imagined Stallone sitting alone in a bunk, nights spent staring at ceiling seams, wondering which vivid nightmare would come first. A bruise on his own bicep pulsed, a remnant of a drill gone wrong, and he coughed as if to clear the lingering tension in his lungs. Real soldiers, he realized, didn't broadcast every ache or show off every wound. Their scars lay buried beneath uniforms, in the hollow of their eyes, in the tremor of a hand reaching for an old photograph. Pulling up his sleeve, he caught his reflection, a boy thrust too soon into grown-up violence. He wished he could unmock those who earned their pain, but bitterness had once tasted like power. The locker door creaked open, and Stallone's broad silhouette filled the frame. He stepped in slowly, gaze unwavering yet gentle, as if he already knew what the boy carried. Silence stretched between them, but it spoke volumes. No questions were asked, no explanations given. Stallone lifted his own sleeve, revealing a network of raised lines etched by shrapnel and time. In that shared stillness, the unspoken truth settled. Some scars breathed in darkness, and only those willing to listen could ever learn their stories. The next morning, history class hummed with a low drone of chatter. Mason sat in the back row, arms crossed, earbuds tucked away, but ready. The door opened, and Stallone entered, guest mentor today, not the hero on stage. His uniform replaced by a simple button-up and jeans, sleeves rolled to reveal those quiet reminders of war. The students straightened, some rolling their eyes. Mason leaned back, feigning indifference. Stallone drew a neat chalk diagram of World War II troop movements, his movements precise, practiced. He spoke of strategy and sacrifice, but Mason's mind drifted to the way the veteran's knuckles bore faint calluses, the slight wince when he extended his wrist. A whispered chuckle rippled behind him. Mason turned, catching Dylan mouthing, "movie star act," and masked his own reaction with a vacant stare. Mid-lecture, Stallone paused and scanned the room. His gaze settled on Mason, who shifted under its weight. The veteran set down his chalk and walked over, each step measured. Mason's heartbeat filled his ears as classmates turned to watch. Stallone knelt by his desk, voice low enough for only Mason to hear. No accusation, just a steady question. "Do you know why I study these battles?" Mason opened his mouth, then closed it. Stallone rose and returned to the board, but Mason's breath remained shallow. The veteran's words echoed in his mind. It wasn't to glorify bloodshed. Stallone drew a final arrow, underlining how decisions cost lives. The room quieted as he explained the human cost behind each statistic. Mason felt the weight of names, friends lost, villages razed, futures shattered. When class ended, students filed out, buzzing with some new respect. Mason remained seated until Stallone gathered his notes. The veteran paused again at Mason's desk and offered a single, quiet nod. No praise, no scolding, just acknowledgement. In that gesture, Mason sensed a challenge, to step beyond mockery and try understanding. For the first time, history felt alive and urgent. Mason pocketed his phone and picked up his notebook, ink poised over blank lines. He didn't know what to write, but he knew it had to be more than facts and dates. It had to honor the scars behind the stories. After class, Mason gathered his bag, tension knotting in his shoulders. He hesitated in the hallway, glancing toward the exit, then spotted Stallone leaning against the wall, arms folded. The veteran's posture was relaxed, but his eyes held that same steady focus. Mason swallowed and approached, curiosity battling lingering pride. "You seemed interested in today's lesson," Stallone said, voice even. No reproach, just observation. Mason shifted on his feet, hands fumbling with a loose strap. I didn't know the details," he admitted softly. Stallone nodded. "Most don't, until they're willing to listen." He gestured toward an empty bench nearby. Mason followed, seating himself with cautious distance. Stallone folded himself beside him, gaze fixed down the corridor. For a moment, they watched students pass, late for next class, laughter echoing off lockers, before Stallone spoke again. "When I returned home, I carried more than stories," he said quietly. "I carried questions about why I was spared and others weren't. I struggled with silence, with nightmares that no one else could see." His fingers traced a faint ridge on his forearm, almost unconsciously. Mason leaned closer, drawn by the vulnerability in Stallone's tone. "I found guidance in purpose," Stallone continued. "I mentored young people, shared truth, not glory. It gave my scars meaning beyond pain." He turned to Mason, offering a small, encouraging smile. "If you ever want to understand more, beyond dates and diagrams, I'm here. No judgment, just honest answers." Mason's chest tightened. The invitation hung between them like a lifeline. He'd mocked Stallone's uniform, but here was a man extending compassion instead of contempt. "Why me?" Mason asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Because you're asking questions," Stallone replied. "That's where real respect begins." He stood, clapping Mason's shoulder with gentle firmness. "Think about it. History isn't just in books. It's in the people who lived it." As Stallone walked away, Mason remained on the bench, heart pounding. The corridor felt different now, full of stories waiting to be heard. He unzipped his bag, removed his notebook, and wrote a single line at the top of the page. "I want to listen." And for the first time, he believed he could. Mason sat in his usual spot at the lunch table, textbooks stacked neatly beside his tray. His friends, Dylan, Kai, and Reed, buzzed about the upcoming football game, oblivious to the battlefield he'd wandered on a last afternoon. Stallone had offered to share more of his story if Mason would listen, but Mason couldn't admit that he wanted to. Pride puckered in his chest whenever he imagined facing the veteran alone. A ripple of whistles drew his attention as Stallone walked through the cafeteria line, trading his mentor badge for a staff pass. Conversations faltered as students recognized him. Mason's stomach twisted. He spotted an empty booth off to the side, out of sight from most tables, and after a moment's hesitation, he rose and slipped away. His friends glanced up as he left, but said nothing. He found Stallone seated beneath a banner proclaiming honor and sacrifice, quietly eating his sandwich. The veteran glanced up, eyebrows rising in friendly question. Mason paused at the table's edge, arms crossed. Stallone patted the seat across from him. Mason chewed his lip, glance skittering around the cafeteria. A stray football thumped behind him. Laughter echoed. "I thought you might be here," Stallone said softly. Mason swallowed, clearing his throat. "I can't just leave everyone," he muttered, voice tight. Stallone nodded, understanding in his eyes. "It's your choice," he said. "No audience needed." Mason exhaled, sliding into the seat. Silence settled, charged with anticipation. Stallone offered half the sandwich. Mason shook his head, but his guard wavered. He flicked open his notebook, lines still blank from yesterday's promise, and set it between them. Stallone removed his jacket, draping it over the chair back, sleeves revealing faint, pale scars that told of survival. Mason's pen hovered, heart thudding. He might be a reluctant audience, but he was finally here. The cafeteria's clatter dimmed as Stallone cleared his throat. Mason angled his tray away, trying not to stare, but curiosity won. Stallone leaned forward, voice low with the gravity of memory. "I was 19 when I first stepped into that dessert," he began, eyes distant. "Sand everywhere, like an ocean without water. The nights were colder than winter here, so quiet you could hear your own heartbeat." He paused, jaw tightening. Mason scribbled the opening line. The desert night was a mirror to fear. Stallone folded his hands. Our patrol moved past an abandoned village. No children, no laughter, just empty streets and the scent of something burned. That's when we heard the rattling. His fingers tapped the table in time with an echo only he could hear. "ID," he said. "Explosive device hidden under rubble." One step, one wrong footfall, and his gaze caught Mason's, steady and unflinching. Mason's pen stuttered. The blast threw me into a wall. Everything went white. Stallone's voice tightened, but he pressed on. When I came around, I was lying on rocks. My radio was gone, my rifle bent. I remember crawling to a fallen buddy, Charlie. His eyes were open, unseeing. I held him as he slipped away. Stallone swallowed, a shadow crossing his face. Mason's chest grew tight. He realized this wasn't a tale, but a confession. Stallone lifted his sleeve, revealing the pale line that zigged across his bicep. "This," he said, "is the mark of that night. But every time I look at it, I remember Charlie's laugh. I remember why I keep going." He traced the scar with a fingertip. Mason's pen danced across the notebook, words flowing without thought. The cafeteria lights buzzed overhead. Students at nearby tables whispered and watched, sensing something had shifted. Stallone folded his sleeve back, voice softer. "Every scar tells a story, Mason. Some are painful. Some remind us why we fight to live." He offered a small, encouraging nod. Mason closed his notebook, eyes wet. He realized that listening had opened a door he couldn't close. In the hush between bites of cold sandwich, he felt the first stirrings of respect, rooted not in obligation, but in understanding the cost behind those scars. And for the first time, he wanted to know more. He woke before dawn, heart pounding as if the desert still hunted him. The base's lights hazed through the canvas walls of the tent, stirring him from a restless sleep. Every muscle ached from yesterday's drills, but he pushed himself upright. Today wasn't about training, it was about survival. He strapped on his gear, breathing slow to quiet the tremor in his hands, and stepped into the brittle morning air. The sun hovered at the horizon like a distant promise as his squad rucked toward the training ground. Instructors barked orders amid the clatter of boots and clinking equipment. Mason, Stallone before he was a mentor, felt eyes on him. Fresh-faced rookie among hardened soldiers. He tightened his jaw and remembered Charlie's grin. Steady reassurance before every mission. That thought fueled his resolve. They moved through obstacle courses, leaping over walls and under barbed wire. Mason matched pace, sweat stinging his eyes, lungs burning with each grunt. When they reached the final stage, the instructors signaled the live exercise, room clearing in simulated combat conditions. Heart thudding, Stallone kicked down the plywood door with a crash. Inside, blank targets stood ready. He swept through the room, weapon raised, focus absolute. A sudden flashbang erupted, painful white light, followed by deafening noise. His ears rang. Instinct drove him forward into cover, but a sharp crack tore through his side. He stumbled, breath knocked from his chest. The world swayed beneath him. Dazed, he pressed a hand over the wound, warm and damp. Nothing but training had gone wrong. He tasted iron on his tongue and forced himself to remain calm. Charlie appeared at the doorway, eyes wide. Without a word, Charlie grabbed Stallone's arm and pulled him behind a concrete barrier. He tore open his kit and applied pressure to the gash. Every heartbeat hammered against Mason's ribs. He locked eyes with Charlie, nodding once. "I'm good." But beneath the pain, something deeper bloomed, pride in pushing through fear. When medics arrived, Stallone refused evacuation until the exercise ended, standing tall despite the blood staining his uniform. Later, in the dim glow of the aid station, they stitched the wound, a straight line that would fade to a pale mark. Stallone traced it gently, feeling its rough edges beneath his fingertips. That scar became his first Medal of Honor, a reminder that bravery was born in quiet choice, to stand and fight, even when every instinct screamed to quit. The next morning, Mason's locker bore a hastily scrawled slogan, "Veterans are liars." His chest tightened as he read it, the words slashing more sharply than any combat wound. He traced the paint with a fingertip, heart pounding. At that moment, Stallone strode into the hallway, eyes scanning until they met Mason's. Without a word, he nodded and followed him to the locker. Stallone read the slogan, lips pressing into a thin line. He pulled a clean cloth from his pocket and, with deliberate calm, wiped away the insult. Mason watched, breath caught in his throat. When the graffiti disappeared, Stallone looked at him and said, "Prejudice is easy. Truth takes effort." His voice was quiet, but echoing through Mason's mind. In history class later, Stallone held up a letter from a veteran friend who'd returned with PTSD. His tone was gentle as he spoke of shame and misunderstanding, of neighbors who turned away when they saw the uniform's cost etched on a man's face. Mason shifted in his seat, recalling the locker's ugly message. How could someone assume lies when they hadn't listened? After school, Mason found Stallone in the gym, practicing aim on a target board. He hesitated, then approached. Stallone lowered his rifle and looked up. "I wanted to say thank you," Mason began, voice unsteady, "for not letting me walk away." Stallone's gaze softened. "It's not about you," he replied. "It's about fighting ignorance, wherever it hides." Mason picked up a piece of chalk and scribbled above the erased locker, scarred but not broken. He stepped back, heart thudding, and Stallone smiled, brief, genuine. The message wasn't loud, but it spoke volumes. As they turned to leave, Mason felt the weight of those words settle in his chest. Confronting prejudice wasn't a single blow. It was a series of small, intentional acts, erasing lies, sharing truths, and rewriting the narrative for anyone willing to see beyond fear. And for the first time, Mason understood that earning respect meant standing up not just for oneself, but for those whose stories went unheard. Mason stared at the assignment sheet. Pair up with a veteran for an interview and write a reflection. His stomach twisted when he saw the name, Private Lewis, listed beside his. He'd heard rumors. Lewis had returned home fractured, bitter at civilians who couldn't understand. Mason wondered if he was ready. In the community room after school, Mason found Lewis seated at a folding table, fingers drumming a restless rhythm. The veteran's uniform jacket lay folded neatly beside him, tags polished. Lewis looked up, eyes cautious. "You Mason?" he asked. Mason nodded, swallowing. "I'll get the recorder started," he managed. They began with routine questions, branch, deployments, duration. Lewis answered curtly, gaze flickering away. Mason pressed on. "What was the hardest part?" Lewis's jaw clenched. "Walking down Main Street in uniform," he said, voice low. "Everyone stares, some applaud. Most just stare like I'm a ghost." He paused. "They don't see you once you hang it up." Mason hesitated, then asked, "Did that hurt more than combat?" Lewis's eyes burned. "You ever lost friends?" Mason nodded at the memory in Stallone's stories, but said nothing. Lewis slammed his palm on the table. "No, you don't know that loss. You don't know the empty wake." His voice cracked, and Mason flinched at the raw pain. Silence stretched between them. Mason fumbled for tissues, offering them. Lewis took one, shoulders shaking. "I'm sorry," Mason whispered. "I didn't realize." Lewis stared at him, then let out a ragged breath. "Most don't," he admitted. Mason watched tears glisten on Lewis's cheeks and felt something shift in his chest. This wasn't a story to report. It was a wound laid bare. He asked gently, "What helps you heal?" Lewis sniffed, wiping his nose. "Talking to someone who listens without pity," he said. "Someone who sees me, not the uniform." Mason tapped record off and closed his notebook. "I hear you," he said simply. Lewis's wary expression softened. "That's more than most give," he replied. As they packed up, Mason realized empathy wasn't about grand gestures. It was about bearing witness to another's pain without turning away. And in that room, a bridge formed between two lives, built on the courage to truly listen. The next morning, Mason spotted Private Lewis in the courtyard, sitting alone on a bench and staring at the fountain's rippling water. He carried 2 steaming coffees and approached without making a sound. Lewis glanced up, surprised by the unexpected warmth. Mason handed him a cup. Lewis's fingers closed around the mug, and for a moment neither spoke. They sat side by side, shoulders nearly touching. A breeze stirred fallen leaves across the concrete. Mason watched the way Lewis's gaze softened as he cradled the coffee, steam fogging his glasses. No words were needed. The gesture spoke of understanding, of reaching across a divide neither had bridged before. After a slow sip, Lewis set his cup down and offered one back. Mason took it, noting the careful way Lewis wiped the rim with a sleeve. Lewis's lips twitched in what almost looked like a smile. Mason returned it with a nod. They rose and began walking along the brick path, steps synchronized by habit rather than conversation. Each passed bench, each tree trunk traced with Mason's gaze, but his focus was on Lewis's even stride. The silence between them carried more weight than any small talk could. Lewis paused at a sculpture of an eagle with outstretched wings. He reached out, fingertips brushing the metal feathers. Mason felt compelled to stand beside him, pressing his hand lightly against the cool surface. Fingers almost brushed, and both recoiled instinctively. Yet the moment remained charged, a silent acknowledgement of shared respect. A group of students chased a soccer ball nearby, their laughter echoing. Lewis glanced toward them and then back at Mason. He tilted his head, as if asking question. Mason simply pointed to the field. Lewis nodded, understanding without a word. They joined the game's perimeter, leaning against the fence. As a stray ball rolled toward them, Lewis kicked it back with a flick of his foot. The ball soared, and the kids cheered. Mason clapped softly, and Lewis met his gaze, eyes bright. Their unspoken bond was clear, 2 unlikely allies finding common ground in small acts. No accolades, no speeches, just a quiet understanding that sometimes the strongest connections are forged in shared silences and simple gestures of kindness. Mason found Lewis's address scrawled on the assignment sheet and hesitated before knocking. The front door swung open to reveal peeling paint and overgrown shrubs. Nothing like the tidy base housing Mason imagined. Lewis stood in the doorway, uniform jacket replaced by a faded hoodie, expression guarded. Mason cleared his throat and held up his notebook. "Reflection interview," he reminded gently. Inside, the living room smelled of old coffee and unwashed clothes. Family photos lined a rickety shelf. Lewis in uniform, smile bright. Another of a woman and child standing in a yard. Mason swallowed, noticing the gap. "Your family?" he ventured. Lewis's jaw clenched. "They left when I returned," he said flatly, voice low. "Said I wasn't the son they remembered." He shoved a chair toward Mason and slumped onto the couch. Mason perched on the edge of the chair, heart heavy. "I'm sorry." Lewis stared at the floor. "You get trained to face enemy fire, but no one prepares you for the battles at home." He gestured to a dented coffee table. "Bills pile up, paperwork never ends, and the VA waits on hold all day." His hand shook as he reached for a mug, spilling scalding liquid onto the carpet. "My daughter asked when I'd come to her recital. I told her the base was busy." His voice cracked. She stopped asking after that. Mason's pen hovered. Then he closed his notebook. He crossed the room and knelt beside Lewis, placing a hand over his. "They'll come around," Mason said, though he wasn't sure. Lewis's eyes met his, haunted and weary. "I'm not so sure," he murmured. "Sometimes the hardest wounds aren't the ones you can see." Silence settled, broken only by the distant hum of passing cars. Mason stood and retrieved tissue from his pocket, offering it. Lewis accepted, dabbing at the spill and the unspoken tears in his eyes. "Thank you," Lewis whispered. As Mason left, evening light stretched across the cracked sidewalk. He paused and looked back at the modest house. The weight of Lewis's truth pressed on him. Veterans carried home front wounds as deep as any battlefield scar. And understanding them required more than empathy. It demanded action. Mason tucked his notebook under his arm, resolve forming with each step toward change. Mason stared at the sign taped to the front office door. "No visitors." His chest tightened, but he refused to back down. Clutching a stack of flyers, he marched inside and asked for the principal. Moments later, Stallone emerged from the inner office, eyebrows raised at Mason's determined expression. "I need to talk to you," Mason said, handing over the flyers. Stallone scanned them. Information on a food drive and resource fair for veterans struggling to reintegrate. "You organized this?" Stallone asked quietly. Mason nodded, voice steady despite the flutter in his stomach. "I couldn't ignore what I learned." That afternoon, the gym transformed into a hub of activity. Mason directed volunteers, setting up tables stocked with canned goods, hygiene kits, and job training brochures. Stallone moved among them, offering encouragement, but Mason took the lead, coordinating donations, greeting veterans by name, matching them with support services. When Private Lewis arrived, Mason greeted him with a warm smile. Lewis's eyes widened as he caught sight of the food bags set aside for his family. Mason handed him one and said simply, "Welcome home." Lewis's gratitude shone in a rare, genuine smile. As the event buzzed around them, Stallone pulled Mason aside. "You've come a long way," he said, pride in his voice. Mason looked at the packed gym, the veterans chatting comfortably, families receiving support, students working seamlessly alongside them, and felt something shift inside. It wasn't applause or accolades that mattered. It was seeing real change sparked by understanding and action. He realized then that respect wasn't a one-time gesture, but a living bond maintained through effort. Kids who once whispered jokes now volunteered eagerly. Parents stopped to thank him. Even the principal, standing in a corner, nodded approval. Later, when the last table was cleared and Stallone turned off the lights, Mason lingered. He approached a wall covered with notes from veterans. "Thank you for seeing me. You made me feel valued." Mason placed his hand on the wall, fingertips brushing the words. Stallone's voice came softly behind him. "This is your scar of honor, Mason. Remember it." Mason closed his eyes, feeling the warmth of purpose settle in his chest. The turning point wasn't in hearing stories or earning praise. It was in translating empathy into action, forging a bridge that would endure long after the assembly lights dimmed. The next morning's assembly felt different, quieter, attentive. Students filed in, murmurs hushed as Stallone took the stage, scanning the sea of faces. Mason sat in the front row, palms sweaty around the edge of his seat. When Stallone began speaking about resilience, Mason's stomach clenched. He'd rehearsed his words all night. Stallone paused, letting silence settle. Mason rose, voice trembling but clear. "Sir, I owe you an apology." The words echoed in the gym's hush. Stallone's gaze met his, steady, patient. Mason swallowed and pressed on. "I mocked your service, dismissed your scars as stories. I was ignorant and disrespectful, and I'm sorry." He felt heat creep up his neck as eyes turned toward him. A few students gasped, others shifted expectantly. Stallone's lips curved in a small smile of encouragement. Mason drew a breath. "Listening to you, meeting veterans like Private Lewis, I've learned the cost of real sacrifice." His voice steadied with conviction. "I promise to honor your stories and to stand up for those who've served." A ripple of applause began, tentative, then growing. Stallone nodded once, gestures measured. "Thank you, Mason," he said, voice warm. Apology accepted. The veteran stepped down, extending his hand. Mason approached and shook it firmly, feeling the calluses that spoke of hard work and endurance. The crowd rose, clapping, but neither boy nor man broke eye contact as they clasped hands. Stallone raised Mason's hand in a silent salute to the assembly. Cameras flashed. Mason's friends, seated behind him, exchanged proud smiles. In that moment, the walls between generations collapsed. What began as mockery transformed into mutual respect. When the applause died down, Stallone offered a final thought. An apology takes courage. A commitment to change takes even more. Mason settled back, heart racing not from fear but from pride. He looked at Stallone, gratitude shining in his eyes. The veteran returned it, nodding toward the flag at the gym's center. A reminder that unity and understanding could heal deeper wounds than any treatment. As the assembly concluded, Mason stepped off the bleacher and into a new role as ally, advocate, and friend. The apology had closed one chapter of ignorance. Now he was ready to write the next. Mason strode into the classroom where Stallone had posted a sign-up sheet for the newly formed Veteran Outreach Club. He scanned rows of eager faces, students drawn by Stallone's reputation, but uncertain of their roles. Mason raised his hand and stood. "I'd like to help organize our first project," he said, voice steady. Stallone nodded approvingly and motioned him forward. They gathered around a large table strewn with notebooks and flyers. Mason sketched ideas. A community breakfast at the VFW post, a letter-writing campaign paired with craft kits for deployed troops, and a mentorship program linking students with local veterans. Stallone listened, adding practical insights, logistics, volunteer coordination, and the importance of clear communication when working with sensitive backgrounds. As afternoon light filtered through the windows, students divided tasks. Mason took charge of outreach, drafting emails to local businesses for donations, while classmates handled publicity and event planning. Stallone moved between groups, offering guidance but allowing the students to lead. Mason felt the steady pulse of teamwork, each contribution building toward a shared goal. Later, Mason sat beside Stallone in the hallway. "Thank you for trusting us," he said quietly. Stallone smiled. "Trust is earned, and you've earned it." He tapped Mason's shoulder and turned toward a group of veterans arriving to drop off supplies. Mason watched Stallone greet them by name, genuine warmth in his handshake. That evening, Mason emailed the first batch of businesses. One by one, replies came: a bakery offering muffins, a hardware store donating tools, a printing shop creating signs. Each message felt like a small victory, proof that purpose could rally a community. On the day of the breakfast, the school gym transformed into a welcoming hall. Long tables lined with coffee urns, plates stacked high, and banners reading, "Thank you." Veterans set the tone. Mason greeted each veteran at the door, handing them name tags and escorting them to seats, while Stallone introduced speakers and thanked volunteers. When the last veteran left, Mason and Stallone stood amid the cleared tables. Stallone placed a hand on Mason's back. "Look at what you've built," he said softly. Mason surveyed the empty gym, silent witness to camaraderie forged that morning. "It's more than an event," he realized. "It's a statement of respect." Stallone nodded. Shared purpose turns compassion into action. Mason smiled, knowing they had begun something that would outlive any single assembly, a community bound by gratitude and driven by genuine understanding. Students crowded the courtyard, murmuring around tables draped in red, white, and blue. Mason stood at the center, flanked by Stallone and club officers. He cleared his throat, scanning the sea of faces, cheerleaders, athletes, band members, even a few reluctant debaters. "We're here to make a difference," he began, voice strong enough to carry over the chatter. "Our veterans gave everything for us. Now it's our turn to stand up for them." He pointed to posters announcing the upcoming Operation Care Package, an ambitious drive to collect essentials for active duty troops overseas. "We need your ideas, your energy, and your hearts," he said, pacing slowly. Students leaned in as he outlined goals. Recruit 500 hygiene kits, gather handwritten letters, and raise funds to cover shipping. "Think of someone you love," Mason added, "and imagine they're halfway around the world. That's who we're helping." Whispers rippled into cheers as Stallone stepped forward, voice resonating with authority. "I've seen the impact of support," he said, echoing Mason's call. "Your small act can save a life out there." He gestured to Mason, who felt a surge of pride as classmates exchanged determined nods. Mason divided volunteers into teams, social media, logistics, collection stations, and fundraising. He sent runners across campus, posting flyers in classrooms, announcing the project over the PA system, and challenging clubs to outdo each other in contributions. The debate team pledged to draft persuasive campaign slogans. The band offered to play at the collection table to draw crowds. By the end of the day, collection bins lined the hallways, each overflowing with soap, toothpaste, and notes scrawled on colorful cards. Mason tallied the totals on a whiteboard, 100 kits and counting. A group of football players hoisted a crate of bottled water, laughter echoing as they elbow-bumped volunteers. Even the shyest art students painted patriotic murals for the donation stations. As the final bell rang, Mason stood back, breathless. Stallone slapped him on the shoulder. "You rallied them," he said with a grin. Mason surveyed the buzzing activity, strangers working side by side, united by a common cause. He realized that leadership wasn't about a title, but about inspiring action. And in that moment, surrounded by a campus transformed by purpose, he knew they were on track to meet every goal, and then some. The gymnasium pulsed with energy as vendors and volunteers bustled between tables laden with baked goods, raffle prizes, and handcrafted keepsakes. Mason stood near the entrance, greeting veterans and guiding them toward chairs arranged on the stage. Stallone monitored the soundboard, ensuring the microphone captured every word. The fundraiser began with a hushed moment of reflection, veterans and students bowing their heads as a video montage played, faded photographs of soldiers in training, letters home, and boots marching in solemn cadence. Mason felt the weight of those images settle over the crowd before the applause rose in tribute. Next came the charity run announcement. Mason took the mic, announcing the route around the school grounds. Runners cheered, stamping the floor in eager anticipation. He released balloons tied to color-coded bibs, each hue representing a branch of service, and the gym erupted in a cacophony of cheers. Outside, the cool morning air carried the rhythmic thud of running feet. Mason paced alongside Stallone, matching his stride. Veterans jogged with students, conversations forming between mismatched pairs. A Marine sergeant comparing football techniques with a cross-country runner, an Army private cheering on a hesitant track freshman. Mason felt the camaraderie spark with every exchanged smile and pat on the back. Back indoors, the silent auction table drew a steady crowd. Mason spotted Reed, his friend from before this all began, placing a winning bid on a signed Stallone poster framed with a veteran's commendation. Their eyes met, and Mason nodded, proof of bridges built. As the bake sale dwindled, Mason tallied proceeds on a laptop. The total exceeded their goal, far beyond what he'd imagined. Stallone joined him, offering a firm handshake. Mason shook back, pride swelling. The final moment arrived. Mason invited Private Lewis to the stage. Lewis stepped forward, voice cracking as he thanked everyone for their generosity. Mason watched Stallone's chest rise with quiet emotion as Lewis spoke of feeling honored and seen. When the event closed, veterans lingered to share stories while volunteers packed leftover supplies into vehicles bound for the VA hospital. Mason helped load the last box, hands tired but spirit full. Stallone clapped him on the shoulder. "You turned empathy into real change," he said. Mason smiled, realizing that this fundraiser wasn't just an event. It was a testament to what a community united by respect could achieve. And it was only the beginning. Late that night, Mason lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the day's victories replaying in his mind. Yet beneath the pride lurked unease. Had he done enough? Doubt crept in like a shadow. Questions about whether the bake sale truly helped, whether the letters reached the troops who needed them, whether the veterans felt heard beyond the surface gestures. He tossed and turned until his phone buzzed. A group chat notification from the outreach club. A few messages cheered the results, but one from Kai stood out. Was it real help or just a show? Mason's chest tightened. He knew the intentions had been sincere, but Kai's words echoed the fear that this was all more pageantry than progress. The next morning, Mason found Stallone waiting by the locker row. The veteran's expression was gentle but direct. "Thoughts keeping you up?" Stallone asked. Mason hesitated, then admitted his worry. What if we're just patting ourselves on the back? What if it doesn't change anything? Stallone studied him, then nodded. Good questions. True support isn't a one-day event. It's building ongoing commitment. He handed Mason a pamphlet, a proposal for a year-round mentorship program. This, Stallone said, is how we move from gala to genuine. In homeroom, Mason drafted an email to the principal, requesting dedicated meeting space and small budget for monthly veteran student forums. His palms shook as he hit send, but relief washed over him. He realized that doubt could be a catalyst rather than a chain. Later, at the empty gym, Mason organized leftover supplies into labeled bins, earmarked for future use. He scribbled Phase 2 on the whiteboard. Support groups, job fairs, fundraisers tied to key holidays. Stallone arrived with 2 coffees, setting one before Mason. Plan looks solid, he said, resting a hand on Mason's shoulder. Doubt shows you care. Now, channel into action. Mason nodded, focus sharpening. He'd faced uncertainty in classrooms and courtyards. Now he faced it in himself. And in acknowledging that the road ahead required persistence, not applause, he found renewed purpose. Shadows of doubt remained, but they were no longer paralyzing. Rather, they were signposts guiding him toward deeper, lasting impact. Weeks passed before Mason saw Private Lewis again, this time through the front glass of the school's guidance office. Lewis stood tall in civilian clothes, hands tucked into the pockets of a worn leather jacket, eyes scanning the hallway with guarded curiosity. Mason caught Stallone's eye and followed him inside. Lewis turned when they approached. He offered a cautious nod. "Mind if I come in?" Mason gestured. Inside, the office smelled of polished wood and faint lavender from Mrs. Ramirez's diffuser. Lewis perched on a chair, posture rigid. Mason sat across, heart pounding. He slid a sealed envelope across the desk. "For you," he said, "from students who wanted to say thanks." Inside were letters, handwritten notes filled with gratitude, drawings, even snapshots of students wearing green socks on PTSD Awareness Day. Lewis opened the envelope slowly, eyes misting as he read. Stallone leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "We wanted you to know we haven't forgotten," he added softly. Lewis looked up, meeting Mason's gaze. "I didn't expect this," he whispered. He folded a note gently and tucked it into his jacket pocket. "I've been using the resource room to apply for jobs," Lewis continued, voice steadier. "I got called back for an interview next week." His lips curved in a small, proud smile. "Feels good to have a reason to keep going." Mason's chest warmed. "You earned it," he replied. "We're here for you." Lewis stood, walking to a bulletin board covered in flyers for upcoming club events and mentorship sessions. He traced a finger over the Veteran Student Forum poster, then turned back. "I'll be there," he said, "and I want to help others like me." Outside, the afternoon sun filtered through blinds, casting stripes across the floor. Mason and Stallone exchanged a glance. This was more than a fundraiser or a project. It was a ripple of change blooming into something bigger. As Lewis strode out of the office, Mason felt a surge of pride. The veteran's return signaled more than progress. It was a testament to community, compassion, and the power of follow-through. And for Mason, it confirmed that real impact wasn't a single act, but a steady commitment to stand by those who'd served. At lunch, Mason spotted Kai and Reed huddled by the locker bay, whispering with tense expressions. As he approached, the ringleader, a student named Cole, stepped forward, arms crossed. "So, Outreach Club's big hero," he sneered, voice loud enough for passing classmates to hear. "Why don't you put your money where your mouth is? Bet you can't help a real veteran under pressure." Mason's heart thudded. "What do you mean?" he asked, keeping his tone even. Cole smirked and pulled out his phone, waving it. "I signed up Private Lewis for the school debate. First topic, government spending on vets. I hear he's emotional. Think he can handle a room full of skeptics?" He laughed, and nearby students chuckled nervously. Mason glanced at Lewis, who stood off to the side, expression unreadable. The veteran's fingers drummed the debate table. Mason felt a flash of panic. This was more than ridicule. It was a test of everything they'd built. He squared his shoulders. "I'll support him," he said quietly. Cole's laugh turned mocking. "Support him? That won't save him from questions about PTSD or his home life. You ready to clean up that mess?" He flicked his phone again, crowd closing in. Mason looked to Stallone, who stood a few feet away, calm but alert. Mason stepped between Cole and Lewis. "Stop it," he said, voice firmer than he felt. "This isn't about showmanship. It's about honest dialogue." Cole's sneer faltered for a moment. "Oh, so you care now?" he spat. "After you made him a mascot?" Mason's chest burned, but he held eye contact. "Lewis isn't a mascot. He's a person, and I'll prove it." Turning to Lewis, Mason offered his hand. "You ready?" Lewis took a breath, exhaling slowly, then nodded. "Let's do it." Stallone moved in beside them, a silent show of solidarity. Cole's eyes flicked to the group, uncertainty replacing his bravado as Mason led Lewis toward the debate hall. The locker bay fell silent. Cole's smirk vanished as he watched Mason shoulder adversity once more, not for applause, but for a friend. And in that moment, Mason realized that rebuilding respect meant facing conflict head-on, even when the wounds ran deep. The debate hall buzzed as students filed in, rows of chairs facing a raised platform. Mason guided Lewis to the defendant's podium, next to the government's funding advocate. Cole sat in the audience, phone ready. The moderator called the room to order, and Lewis gripped the podium, scanning familiar faces. A hush fell. The first question, should veteran services receive increased federal funding? The opposing student launched into statistics and budgetary concerns. Lewis waited, breathing steady, then spoke from experience. "When I came home, I couldn't afford therapy or childcare for my daughter. I watched friends lose homes because benefits fell through. Our nation's promise shouldn't end at the battlefield." His voice was calm but firm, each word carrying the weight of truth. The hall leaned in. Cole's allies murmured, but Lewis continued. "Funding programs means fewer suicides, fewer broken families, fewer veterans forgotten. It's not charity, it's obligation." He paused, letting the idea resonate. Mason watched his notebook, jotting down key moments but mainly feeling pride. Next came the cross-examination. Cole stood, voice dripping skepticism, but government budgets are tight. Are we helping veterans or enabling dependency? A ripple of tension passed through the crowd. Lewis squared his shoulders, gaze unwavering. Dependency or dignity? Providing resources empowers veterans to rebuild lives, contribute to communities, and mentor the next generation, like we're doing here. He gestured toward Mason and Stallone seated at the back. I'm here because this school believed in me. The audience shifted, expression softening. Cole faltered, searching for a retort, but Lewis had already moved to his conclusion. Honor isn't just a medal, it's action. Upholding our promise to veterans honors their sacrifice and strengthens our nation. He stepped back, nodding respectfully to the moderator. Silence lingered before applause broke out. First polite, then wholehearted. Cole slumped, phone lowering. Mason rose and joined Lewis on the platform. He raised the veteran's hand, echoing Stallone's signature salute. The hall erupted anew. Mason's eyes met Lewis's, both glistening. As they exited, Stallone greeted them with a proud nod. Mason realized that honoring veterans meant championing their voices, especially when challenged. Upholding honor wasn't passive acceptance. It was standing up, speaking out, and ensuring that respect endured beyond ceremonies and fundraisers. And today, they had done exactly that. Mason found his father waiting by the car after school, arms crossed and eyes softening as he saw his son approach. The evening sun cast long shadows across the parking lot. Mason hesitated, remembering the hesitant words he'd spoken on stage days earlier. His father, usually reserved, held out a folded school newsletter. Across the front page, a photo captured Mason guiding Private Lewis at the debate podium, Stallone standing proudly behind them. I saw this, his father said quietly. Mason glanced at the image, his hand gripping Lewis's shoulder in solidarity, and nodded. You did good, son. His father's voice wavered, pride shining through the rough edge of emotion. Mason's chest tightened. They walked to the car together. In the driver's seat, Mason's younger sister waved from the back, clutching letters the club had written. His mother leaned forward, eyes bright. Mason felt warmth bloom in his chest. His father started the engine and glanced at the newsletter again. I was wrong, he admitted. I didn't understand why you got so involved. But watching you, helping people who needed it, I couldn't be more proud. Mason exhaled, a weight lifting. At home, the living room walls bore family photos. Mason's childhood birthdays, Christmas mornings, yet tonight felt different. His father retrieved an old framed picture from the mantel. A younger version of himself in uniform, rifle slung, eyes distant. Beneath it, a faded plaque commemorated his own service decades ago, something he'd never discussed. His father placed it gently on the coffee table. I was scared no one would listen. He confessed, voice low. I didn't want to be a burden. Mason knelt beside the photo, tracing the plaque's letters. That's why I did this, he said softly. For you, for them, so no one feels forgotten. His father nodded, eyes misting. They sat together, a father and son bound by shared understanding. Mason's actions rekindling respect for sacrifices long silent. Outside, dusk settled, and the house felt alive with unspoken gratitude. In that moment, Mason realized that earning a father's pride was one thing. Honoring the legacy of unseen scars was something deeper, weaving their stories into a bond forged by empathy and love. Years later, the school auditorium brimmed with families, alumni, and community leaders gathered for the inaugural Veterans Day Leadership Award ceremony. Mason, now in his final year of college, returned to accept the honor bearing Stallone's name. He walked to the podium, spotting familiar faces in the crowd. Past club members, Private Lewis, now a counselor at the VA hospital, and his own parents seated together, their smiles radiant. He cleared his throat, recalling the first assembly where ignorance had reigned. This award represents more than my actions, he began, voice steady. It honors every veteran who whispered their truths, every student who dared to listen, and every mentor who believed change was possible. He paused, eyes sweeping the room. Respect isn't inherited. It's earned through compassion, persistence, and the courage to confront prejudice. Murmurs of agreement rippled as Mason told of Stallone's unwavering presence, of the food drives and debates, of struggles met with action rather than words. He spoke of the lockers cleared of graffiti, the mentorship program that paired dozens of students with veterans who found new purpose guiding youth, and the year-round forums that transformed the school culture. Legacy, he said, is not a memory, it's a living commitment. A video montage played, showcasing veterans sharing stories and students responding with letters, service projects, and ongoing volunteer work. Mason watched, humbled by how far they'd come. He turned back to the audience. I accept this award on behalf of a community that refused to let history stay silent. May it remind us that respect must be renewed each day. He stepped aside as Stallone, older now but still commanding, joined him. Stallone clasped Mason's hand, pride shining in his eyes. Together, they raised the award, a crystal statue etched with intertwined hands, symbol of unity. Applause filled the hall, echoing like a promise carried through time. As lights dimmed and attendees filed out, Mason lingered with Private Lewis. "We did it," Lewis said quietly, handing him a card. Inside, a simple note, "Thank you for giving my story a home." Mason folded it to his heart. Walking into the night with Stallone at his side, Mason realized the true legacy wasn't a trophy, but the respect woven into every scar and every shared story, an unbreakable bond across generations. The summer after graduation, Mason landed an internship with a renowned veterans advocacy nonprofit in Washington, D.C. On his first day, he strode into a cavernous office filled with policy papers and earnest professionals debating funding levels. Mason felt a familiar knot of uncertainty. This was bigger than his high school projects. He attended his first briefing on expanding mental health services for returning service members. Complex legislation, budget constraints, and political infighting blurred together. Mason realized that heartfelt letters and bake sales weren't enough to sway senators. He swallowed, recalling Stallone's advice. Purpose grows where doubt resides. When a senior analyst handed him a thick report on VA funding shortfalls, Mason hesitated, then set to work. Nights blurred into early mornings as he pored over data, drafting policy briefs that translated real stories into clear recommendations. He interviewed veterans in crowded clinics, gathering first-hand accounts to illustrate the human impact of abstract numbers. Midway through the internship, Mason was invited to testify at a congressional subcommittee. Standing behind a microphone beneath stern portraits of founding fathers, he felt the eyes of lawmakers and cameras on him. He opened his testimony with a memory of Private Lewis. When my classmate couldn't afford therapy, he nearly lost his family. He outlined specific policy changes, citing sections of the report he'd helped craft. His voice wavered only once, when he warned that without action, more families would fracture. Afterward, a congresswoman approached, commending his clarity and passion. Mason realized this was his new battlefield, policy arenas where words could shape lives. But he also understood the enormity of the task. Beyond the hearing, lobbying groups, media cycles, and budget negotiations would tug at progress. That evening, Mason video called Stallone. He recounted the day's triumphs and frustrations. Stallone listened, then said, "Every system resists change. You've learned to speak for those without a voice. Now, keep fighting, no matter how long the road." Mason ended the call and gazed out at the city skyline, lights flickering like distant stars. He felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders, and a fierce determination to honor the legacy of respect he'd helped build. New challenges lay ahead, but Mason knew that with purpose guiding him, he could transform doubt into progress, one policy at a time. Years after Mason's work in Washington, he returned to his high school for a special ceremony, the passing of leadership in the Veteran Outreach Club to a new generation. He stepped into the familiar courtyard, sunlight filtering through the oak trees where he'd once rallied classmates. Before him stood a circle of eager underclassmen, notebooks in hand, faces alight with anticipation. At the center, Mia, an articulate sophomore who joined during her grandmother's VA stay, clutched the club's red binder, its pages filled with mission statements, event plans, and letters from veterans. Mason placed a hand on her shoulder. "This belongs to you now," he said, voice warm. "Inside, you'll find every lesson we learned, every project we launched. But remember, rules don't change lives, people do." Mia's eyes shone as she accepted the binder. Stallone, seated nearby with gray at his temples, nodded in approval. Mason continued, "You'll face doubts, budgets that stall, apathy in your peers, and veterans who feel forgotten. Let empathy guide you. When you listen, and when you act, you create ripples no obstacle can drown." He handed flyers for the upcoming Letters Across Generations campaign to two juniors. "Write for your community," he urged. "Share your stories. Then collect theirs." He watched them distribute the flyers, energy rippling outward. A freshman named Carlos approached, asking questions about coordinating with the VA hospital. Mason guided him to Stallone, who gladly offered practical tips. Before leaving, Mason gathered the group. "I may be gone again soon," he said with a grin, "but my belief in you stays. Keep this torch burning. Pass it to others as I've passed it to you." He pointed to the banner fluttering overhead. "Respect is a marathon, not a sprint. Run your laps," he added. "And when you tire, remember why we started, to honor scars earned in service and to ensure no voice goes unheard." As Mason walked away, the students exchanged determined glances. Mia flipped open the binder, scanning its first page, "Begin with listening." Stallone placed an encouraging hand on her back. In that moment, Mason's legacy lived on, not in trophies or headlines, but in the steady, continuing heartbeat of compassion carried forward by new hands. Mason paused at the entrance of the National Memorial Plaza, crimson poppies swaying in the evening breeze. He'd flown back for the dedication of a new sculpture honoring veterans' unseen wounds. Among the crowd stood Stallone, dignitaries, and veterans whose lives he'd touched, Lewis included, now a mentor to many. Mason's chest tightened with emotion as the bronze figure emerged. Two hands clasped, one weathered and scarred, the other young and unblemished. At the podium, Mason cleared his throat. "These hands represent more than wounds," he began, voice steady against the hush. "They embody real scars, visible and hidden, and the strength found in carrying them forward." He recalled his first mockery in a crowded gym, the hesitating steps toward understanding, and every chapter of growth since. "True courage," he continued, "comes from acknowledging pain and forging purpose from it." He stepped down as the sculptor, a Vietnam veteran with silver hair and steady hands, unveiled the plaque, in honor of those who bear scars seen and unseen, and to those who stand with them. Applause rippled through the plaza, heartfelt and sustained. Mason looked to Lewis, whose eyes glistened with pride, then to Stallone, nodding with that familiar grace. Later, Mason wandered to the sculpture's base where visitors left tokens, dog tags, letters, photographs. He placed his hand against the cool bronze, fingertips resting over the veteran's knuckles. Memories fluttered. The cafeteria interviews, the fundraisers buzz, the debates, the policy battles in Washington. Each moment a stitch in the tapestry of respect they'd woven together. A young reporter approached, pressing a microphone into his hand. "What does this moment mean to you?" she asked. Mason thought of every veteran who'd share their story, every student who'd listened, and every scar that spoke of survival. "It means strength," he said softly, "not in the absence of pain, but in the decision to stand despite it. Our scars remind us where we've been and guide us toward where we must go." As twilight deepened, Mason, Stallone, and Lewis stood in quiet solidarity. The sculpture's shadows lengthened, merging with the poppy's red glow. In that gentle dark, their legacy shone brightest. Real scars, real strength, and a promise that no wound would ever be faced alone.